the mechanisms of oxidative phosphorylation and photophosphorylation are very similar, because they both rely on electron transport and a proton motive force. How are we doing? I know this is a tough class. I know this is a tough week because you're looking at the lab reports and we're having an exam next week. I know. I'm very aware. This is, however, we've had the toughest part of the class so far already. We're actually over the hill. I'm not sure if I should say that. But if you're going over the hill, they're going down. Okay, summary of the light reactions. Light energy is used to capture energy in the form of chemicals, so chemical energy, in the form of NADPH and ATP. There's a lot of energy stored in those. The low energy electrons in water are used to get high energy electrons in NADPH under the influence of light energy. The flow of electrons to NADPH is via an electron transport chain. The electron transport chain drives the proton gradient, which drives ATP formation. Okay? The summary of the light reactions. The oxygen that is formed is just a byproduct of photosynthesis. It comes from the splitting of water. This process of photosynthesis started 3 to 3.5 billion years ago on our planet. It took the photosynthesizers roughly 2 billion years to really create enough oxygen so that it became significant in the atmosphere. The reason for that is that on our planet there's a lot of iron. Iron is the most abundant element in the universe, actually. And the most abundant in our planet and in the top 5 on the surface of the planet. And iron can react with oxygen, forming iron oxides. And if you go outside on a not snowy day, you see always red rocks. Here in Colorado, right? Colorado, red in Spanish. Or the red color of the sediments in the Colorado River, I believe, which come from sediments with iron oxide in there. That iron oxide is formed in the first 2 billion years of photosynthesis. Iron combining with oxygen took 2 billion years for all of that iron to become depleted, and then the oxygen levels really started to rise in the atmosphere. After those 2 billion years, it became a possibility for organisms who invented respiration to use the difference in redox energy between organic substrates and oxygen to start to harvest that in a way that can be done very quickly. So you can respond quickly and eat those damn slow lazy photosynthesizers. And that's the story of life. But oxygen for those 2 billion years was nothing but a toxic byproduct until life discovered a way to actually use that explosive mixture if you can equate to rocket fuel. Right. So now we can compare photosynthesis and respiration. And there's a point to this comparison. So in the mitochondrion, respiration has an electron transport chain. In the chloroplast, that chain is in the thylakoids. In the mitochondrion, electron transport starts with complex 1 and 2. There are 2 different starting points. In the thylakoids, in the chloroplast, we start with photosystem 2. But in cyclic electron transport, we can also say we have a starting point, and that's actually a complex 1-like NADPH reductase. So this is some extra information. Now you see there's a similarity between respiration and photosynthesis there. The first complex in the membrane serves to reduce the quinone. We call that quinone ubiquinone in the mitochondrion and plastoquinone in the chloroplast. Are virtually the same molecules. Those quinones reduce a cytochrome containing complex that we call the BC1 complex in the mitochondrion and the BF complex in the chloroplast. That is the same complex, they function in the same way. Kinones and this complex move protons by redox loops. In both cases, that complex gets rid of its electrons by inducing a small soluble protein that is cytochrome C in the mitochondrion and plasticinin in green plants, but it is cytochrome C in many bacteria or in green algae. And actually, why is it plasticinin? Well, all that oxygen made that iron became hard to have, it became difficult, became unavailable. And actually our oceans tend to be iron starved. And so, it might not be so easy to get your heme into your cytochrome, so use copper and plasticinin instead for that function, if you care. In addition, copper was never available before oxygen was high in concentration in the atmosphere. Because all the copper was first bound to sulfur, reduced sulfur compounds, and it took all the oxygen to oxidize that sulfur, which liberated the copper. Okay, so you know. That then also made that copper became available to life to be used in cytochrome C oxidase, which is an enzyme that can do something that's very difficult in respiration, and that is to reduce oxygen in a safe way. And that requires heme and free coppers. So that cytochrome C oxidase accepts the electrons from cytochrome C there, but in the chloroplast, that's a photosystem. And that photosystem serves to reduce NADPH. Now, there's every reason to believe, and there's very good experimental evidence for the hypothesis that respiration is derived from photosynthesis by loss of the photosystems, by repurposing the NADH complex from cyclic electron transport and using it as a complex 1, and by the addition of cytochrome C oxidase. The organisms who did that figured out to just eat other organisms and use their organic molecules to quickly gain energy and to do things quickly, move around also. In this case, in the mitochondrion, there's the NAD coenzyme, there is the NADP coenzyme. Here, NAD is the intermediate that donates to the electron transport chain. NADP plus accepts electrons. We have a protomotive force in the mitochondrion and in the chloroplast. In the mitochondrion, I've argued that protomotive force is mainly a membrane potential, hardly a pH difference, because the protons would only diffuse out of the mitochondrion. It makes a lot of sense to have a pH gradient in the chloroplast, because the thylakoid membrane is an enclosed system, and actually the change in the pH is used to regulate the activity of photosynthesis. In both cases, we have an ATP synthase that's composed of an FO-F1 set of supplements. This is a comparison, that is a comparison that I think you should know. That you should be able to tell us what's the equivalent of, say, ubiquinone, and then what's the equivalent of that in the chloroplast. On and on and on. Because this is half of the story of life, I believe. Okay. Now we can inhibit photosynthesis, we can inhibit respiration. And in principle, we can do two things to inhibit the overall process. In the case of respiration, that means we inhibit ATP production. In the case of photosynthesis, that means we inhibit ATP production and or NADP reduction. We can have two kinds. We can have the so-called uncouplers. These are molecules that provide a pathway for protons to leak back over the membrane without going via the ATP synthase. So if we have this type of molecule in the system, we're getting reduced ATP synthesis because protons move outside of the ATP synthase. But since the system wants to maintain the proton gradient, electron transport actually picks up. Because when we take away protons, the proton motive force is less. And that means there's less energy used to push back for the transport of a proton by an electron transport chain. So it's easier for the electron transport chain to pump. It's like if I would have, I'm going to make a drawing. I'm going to regret my drawing. It's raining today, so water is a topic. Here we have a dam. Okay? We have a dam. Alright? Okay. We're here in Fort Collins. That's where you live. This is actually, that's soil. That's a dam. There's Horsetooth Reservoir here. There's water in Horsetooth Reservoir. Let's say some person is sitting here with a pump, pumping water up over the dam there. When the water level rises to a higher level, it becomes more difficult to pump extra water behind the dam. But when we have a leak here, and water is seeping through the dam, the water level drops, and we can pump more easily. We will pump harder, we'll pump more volume if our dam is leaky. Yeah? Similarly, if we have an uncoupler, a pathway for protons to flow back, then that means that we have faster electron transport, but less ATP synthesis. So the equivalent of ATP synthesis here would be that some engineer would right here have a generator which is used for the production of electricity. When our water level is higher, we can produce more electricity. But when we have a leak, we can make less electricity with the same volume of water. This type of uncoupler is presented by, for instance, ammonia. So ammonia, NH3, NH4+. This is a molecule which in the charged form actually can cross the membrane because that charge is a little bit delocalized of the molecule. So it has some permeability. Therefore, we have ammonia, we have a pathway for protons to cross the membrane. And this is why we do not allow ammonia to accumulate in our blood or in our cells. This is why if we break down amino acids, we get rid of the nitrogen in the amino acids in the form of urea, which is uncharged. And this is why the Dutch, if they think they have a cold, take licorice, because the component of licorice is ammonium chloride. And if you chew on that, it kills the bacteria in your throat. Because the bacteria don't like an uncoupler to sit in there in a membrane. Ammonium chloride, therefore, in low amounts, good for you. The Dutch believe. Okay? Now, another such molecule, dinitrophenol. That's a phenol with two oxygens that can be reduced reversibly. And, let's say that correct. Well, dinitrophenol can move protons across the membrane. And in the 50s and 60s, this was used as a dieting drug. The idea is if you take this molecule, you move protons across our membrane, the mitochondria are losing their proton motive force, the electron transport chain kicks in, goes faster, that means you need more NADH to be reduced, that means you need to break down more glucose and fats. It also means you get hot and sweaty. So if you take too much, you get too hot, and you do get sweaty, but the heat kills you. So it's very unsafe. This, therefore, is no longer used as a dieting drug, and you should never use it. Some people have died in the 50s and 60s. It was popular in England. Dinitrophenol is an uncoupler. Okay, we have blockers. in the case of the mitochondrion, rotenone is an example. It blocks the reduction of ubiquinone. In the chloroplast, DCMU is a molecule that looks like a quinone. It binds to photosystem 2, and it blocks the reduction of plastoquinone. Therefore, this blocks the electron transport chain. We are not getting ATP synthesis because we're not having electron transport at all. DCMU is a herbicide that is kind of an unspecific herbicide. It kills all plants. There's another inhibitor, cyanide. It can do various nasty things. Cyanide likes to bind to the copper in your cytochrome C, therefore blocking cytochrome C. It also can bind to your hemoglobin, therefore blocking oxygen transport in your red blood cells. Both are unhealthy. But I think especially the attack on complex 4 in your mitochondria is what makes cyanide so toxic. Alright. So that brings us to the next part of photosynthesis, which would be the Calvin cycle. Let's remember, the Calvin cycle and the light reactions happen at the same time. The Calvin cycle occurs in the stroma. There's a key enzyme which has this long name, ribulose 1,5-bisphosphate carboxylase oxygenase, shortly called ribisco. There's an Englishman called John Ellis who has called this enzyme the most abundant enzyme on the planet. He was correct, it is. The question is, why is there so much of this enzyme? The short answer is, it is so bad, it sucks so much, plants need a lot of it to actually do the job. Okay. Now, in the Calvin cycle, NADPH and ATP are consumed, not by this enzyme, but by other steps of the cycle. I think we have to look at that on Monday. I'll make a decision on Monday for how far we go for the next exam.